A warm good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
I am the last batsman of this 3-day mega event, which is known as an IPL also, because I have been told in this break that all the speakers which have been here are the master blasters, and it becomes very difficult for all of you to determine who is the best amongst them. And probably I don't have that much of problem because I am the last man, and last men are also interpreters, so I am a little bit in a relaxed side. Coming to the subject proper, friends, today I have to deal with the procedural aspect. So as you know that procedural, it's merely a procedural. If you don't follow it, what will happen? Nothing. Only penalty would be there, nothing else. So you don't have to worry. You don't have to really go into the depth of the technicalities. And I am very much proud that you are doing it from last 2 days. I am trying from last 10 years to understand the law, but I could not able to understand, and really thanks to all of you that at least you have sit for 3 days continuous for 5 hours. That's really a remarkable thing. Now in this procedural things of GST, what would be the procedure? So you have learned that what is supply, what is taxable, what is non-taxable under the GST, what is not covered, especially the basket of petroleum product, especially the LP agricultural produce. So now we have to understand that once you know that I am covered within the GST, the first and foremost would be that registration, because unless and until you register yourself, it won't you are not into that act. So registration is must. So first and foremost question would be, who is required to be registered? Anybody cannot become a registered. For that matter, one of the very important ingredients that yes, I should be in a business of supplying goods or services both to the some person. So now let's understand that who are the person who is required to register. First is all the existing SSCs under the existing law needs to be registered under the GST law. So all the existing law means direct tax also. The obvious reply is no, because under the GST many indirect tax has been subsumed, like excise law, like VAT laws, like service tax law. All these are subsumed into the law which is known as the goods and service tax law. So those existing SSCs under the excise law or a VAT law or a service tax needs to have to migrate. And I am sure that all of you must have done that migration process. From the provisional ID you must have taken till now. And you have now migrated to the GST. So all for them it is mandatory. Now it has been provided by all the officers of the respective law that you have to do the migration before 30th day of April. If you don't do that, then we will take some actions. I am sure you are receiving mails, or your clients must be receiving mails. Whether is it like that? Suppose if I don't register, what would be the situation? Nothing, yes. Absolutely, because law doesn't give that much of power that if I don't register by 30th day of April, something will be done. No, they cannot, because at present GST law is not there. Further, section 166 of the GST law further provides that when the act will come into force, at that point of time, all the SSC needs to be registered by applying some form. But here, all the government agencies are doing go and try, saying that you have to migrate, you have to migrate. But still the problem remains that whether do I have to register. At present also so many SSCs are there who have not received the temporary registrations. Like say their number has not been migrated. Then in that case they are not in a position to do the migration. Still that process is there. So this is what as regards the existing registration and migration. And I am sure a lot of problems are still facing in respect of migration, but then we will not go into the depth of it. Second one is the turnover based criteria. Under the GST law, it has been provided that if your turnover on all over India basis is less than 20 lakhs rupees, then you need not have to register. That option has been provided. That means if it is more than 20 lakhs, by taking into account the whole turnover of all the states, then you need to have to register with the GST portal. Third is the person who is making interstate supplies. Now the categories comes wherein there is no threshold limit exemption. That means the person who is making interstate supply, they have to register from 1 rupee. This is just like existing CST Act, wherein if you do a 1 rupees of interstate sales under the present CST law, then you have to make the register, obtain for the register. Same way, here also, it provides that whenever you supplies the goods or services from one state to another state, which is known as an interstate supply, the registration is mandatory. Third one is the casual or non-resident supplier. So what do you mean by casual and non-resident supplier? These are the persons who doesn't have the fixed place of business in one particular state, and then also they wanted to carry out the business in other places. The best example is the person who wanted to do the exhibit his product in the exhibition in the other state. So that person will go into the state of, say for example, Gujarat. Yes, please. So if the person goes into the state of Gujarat and he wanted to market his product, so he will take participation in the exhibition which is held in Gujarat. And at that point of time, since he is selling the goods or he is supplying the goods or services in the state of Maharashtra, he is considered to be a casual dealer or a casual person, and he has to obtain the registration in the state of Gujarat. So this is known as a casual dealer. Then non-resident dealer. Who is a non-resident dealer? He is a person who doesn't station in the India, but he is from outside India and wanted to do some business in India. Then he is known as a non-resident dealer. In this both the situation, the person have to obtain the registration from single rupee, no threshold limit exemption will be provided. Third one is the voluntary registration, as it is provided in all the law. That if the person still feels that since my turnover is below the threshold limit exemption, I still wanted to be under the voluntary registration, yes, then he has an option. He can very well do the registration under the GST. So now looking into last one is the specific person that I am coming. Now the one of the issue which will arise, that if my turnover is below the threshold limit of 20 lakhs rupees, I know that because in the present scenario for the financial year 16-7 it is less than 10 lakh, and I am anticipating that in the next financial year also my turnover would be less than 10 lakhs rupees. Do I need to do the migration or not? Many this kind of questions are coming. I am sure you will also receiving from your client. So we have to advise our client that if your turnover is happen to be less than 10 lakhs rupees, then it is advisable that you cancel your registration. Then in that respect you need not have to migrate. But suppose if you wanted to continue your registration, then you don't have choice, you have to mandatorily migrate for the GST. Then you don't have choice. Now let's go to the specific class of persons. Who are the specific class of persons who are required to be registered? First one is the person who requires to discharge the tax liability in the reverse charge mechanism. Now this is a novel concept which has been introduced in the service tax law, and this has been bodily lifted from the service tax law. Normally the person who supplies the goods or services, he is liable to discharge the tax liability. But the GST law provides that in respect of certain special category or a class of category of services, the service tax need not to be discharged by the person who supplies the goods or services, but the person who receives the services, goods or services. This is known as a reverse charge mechanism. One more reverse charge mechanism has been come into this regime, is that if you purchase the goods or acquire the goods or services from an unregistered person, then the registered person is required to discharge the tax liability. So this is a new concept which is also known as a URD tax, which was there under the BST era, right? Deepak? So now, if a person, registered taxable person, procures the goods or services from an unregistered dealer, registered dealer needs to discharge the tax liability. So these two kinds of category will cover under reverse charge mechanism. So now what will be the impact? That the person who is unregistered, then he will become, nobody would go to him, because now tax needs to be discharged by the person who is a registered taxable person. So now the option, all the person whose turnover is below that threshold limit 20 lakhs, they have to now decide what is to be done. So the question comes up, what should one do if the turnover is below 20 lakhs rupees? And if he says, yes, legally I am not supposed to obtain the registration, so I will not obtain the registration. But then I become the unregistered dealer. Once I become an unregistered dealer in market, I will not be stood up, because the person who received the services or goods, he will have to discharge the tax liability. This is totally in contradiction with the present law. How? Under the service tax law, a notification has been issued in respect of notification number 33/2012, which says that you are exempt till 10 lakhs rupees, but you can still register and don't discharge the tax liability. Such kind of notification is not yet there under the GST law. So at present, it appears that if the person doesn't obtain the registration by considering his turnover is below 20 lakhs rupees, then in that respect, he would be considered as an unregistered dealer, and he has to then go for the consequences. Next is a person who has to deduct the tax at source. Now, if a person is supplying the goods or services to any government department or a government agency or a local authority, then the law provides that that government agency or a local authority, at the time of remitting the money to the supplier vendor, they have to deduct a withholding tax or a TDS, tax deduction at source, at the rate of 1% if the value of the tax invoice is more than 2.5 lakhs rupees. So those persons, that means government department, though they are not in the process of providing the goods or services, even they need to obtain the registration, because they are required to deduct the TDS. Next is the electronic commerce operator for specified categories of supplies. Now we are aware that major transactions are now carried out with the help of electronic commerce operator. Nowadays, if you see the turnover of Flipkart or Amazon or an Ola or Uber or a Food Panda, it's increasing day by day, and they are getting the funds like anything. Normal businessmen, if they wanted to expand their business and go to the bank, bank will deny the funding. But if you go to this electronic commerce operator like Amazon or a Flipkart, they are getting the money. Why? Because their valuation is there, and more and more people are involved in the electronic commerce transaction. So when a person is doing the transaction with electronic commerce operator, then in that respect, the law provides that the electronic commerce operator have to collect the tax at source while remitting the amount to the supplier. How much percent? Again, the rate of tax is 1% while remitting the money. So this is known as a tax collection at source, and electronic commerce operator has to register himself. Then brokers and agent who supplies the goods on behalf of the other person. Same principle which is at present existing under the VAT law, that all commission agents or a broker or agents who deals with the goods or services, they are required to register, and now whenever a goods or services are transferred from the principal to the agent or broker, that will be considered as a supply, and the tax needs to be discharged by the principal. And in turn, when an agent supplies the goods or services to the ultimate person, at that point of time, agent will charge the GST, and he will obtain the input tax credit of the taxes whatever has been paid to the principal. So this is how whole input tax credit chain will work. Next is the supplying online information and database access and retrieval services. So what this services is that on an electronic platform, when you, by paying the money, you can get whatever information from the website. Like best example is a taxman or a tax sutra, from where we have to give the subscription, and on payment of subscription, one can access the database at any point of time. So this kind of operators are also covered under the GST, and they have to obtain the registration from 1 rupee without any threshold limit. Another example could be that whenever you wanted to nowadays see a movie, then people don't go to the theatre. What they do? They just sit at home, go to the website, they will go to ask the Netflix by payment of some fees, and they can at home see the movie. But for that matter, Netflix will charge some amount, 100 rupees or 200 rupees, and now from January 2015 onwards, service tax has been levied on such services. I don't know how many of you have observed that. But no, don't worry, if you not observe it, I will say that today you go to home, go to Netflix, download one movie, then you will understand that how the transaction is going on. That whenever you download the movie, you have to pay some price. When you pay some price, at present, service tax would be applicable at the rate of 15%, which you have to pay. And now GST will not needs to be paid. Till January 15, such services were exempt services, but now from January 15 onward, this becomes a taxable service. Last is the input service distributor. So, who is this input service distributor? Again, this concept has been bodily lifted from the service tax law. So what basically input service distributor will do? He is a person who does the job of a postman. So what is the job of postman? Postman, he receives the parcel or a post from the person who sends it. He will take it at his end and then distribute it to the person whose name has been written over that. So here also what input service distributor will do? He will have take the credit from all the branches, which suppose, for example, a manufacturing unit is there and they are having 5 branches all over India. And out of that 5 branches, second branch is such where there is an excess input tax credit is there. And 4th branch is such where there is a tax payable is there. Now second branch is having a surplus credit which is available with him, so how it would be distributed? So naturally, in order to distribute the credit, some intermediary is required so that it would be transferred to the other person. So for that matter, input service distributor is there. So the person who is having an excess credit, they will transfer the credit to an input service distributor. Input service distributor will receive it and then it will again distribute it to the person who needs the credit. So this is how the whole transaction will work out. So this is known as an input service distributor. Even they have to register whether or not they are providing any supply transaction or not. So having understood who are the persons who is required to be registered, next question would be who are the persons who is not required to be registered, right? क्योंकि एक टाइम हमें पता चलना चाहिए कौन रजिस्टर होना चाहिए, तो बाकी का नहीं रजिस्टर होगा चलेगा. No, that kind of thing we cannot do. First, when an employee provides the services to an employer, now you know the definition of services. What is the definition of service? In this case, any transaction other than goods is a service. So naturally, transaction between employer and employee becomes a service transaction. But here specifically under Schedule 2 it has been said that such kind of transactions are not covered within the definition of supply, and accordingly such kind of supply need not to be required the registration. But conversely, if it happens to be a reverse way around, then what will happen? When here employee provides a service, but suppose employer provides services to employee, then what will happen? It is taxed. Right? Then services by any court or tribunal established under any law. So what kind of services a court or tribunal provides? By giving the judgment? By pronouncement? No. What kind of service? When you are going to file the appeal before the court of law or a tribunal, they are charging filing fees. What is this filing fee? Filing fees is a service. So that's why they say that even these are not covered within the definition of supply, and even they need not have to register. Services of funeral, burial, crematorium or mortuary services, including transportation of the deceased, even they need not to be covered. So here one of the important things, it says only cover transportation of the deceased. So what will happen in respect of other transportation by the ambulance? They would be covered, they would be considered as a supply, and they have to register. Next is the sale of land and sale of building. So now this comes the immovable property. So whenever you are doing a transaction of an immovable property, that will not be covered within the definition of supply and won't be covered. So you know the definition of goods. Do you know that whether it will cover within the definition of goods? No, because it says if you read the definition of goods, it says it will include only the movable property, not an immovable property. So if you go to the service definition, it says other than goods. So then what can we say that since this is not covered in goods, it is covered in services, but that kind of interpretation we cannot interpret, and accordingly this immovable property transactions are kept out specifically for that purpose. But unfortunately law has not been so clear, and that's why more litigation chances would become, because now it has become act. It never says in the definition of goods or services that such immovable property transactions are out of it. This is just a given provided under the schedule that such land or building, sale of land or a sale of building is not covered within the supply transaction. So now let's see what would be the situation. Next is actionable claim other than lottery, betting or gambling. So what would it cover? It covers the insurance claim, probably provided by an insurance company. They would not be considered as supply, and they did not have to register. Next is the supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. This alcoholic liquor has been specifically kept out within the regime of the GST net. They are at present not covered, I think, within the 2 years period of down the line. Probably it would be covered within the regime of GST law. So now what will happen to the supply of such a liquor for human consumption? They would still be taxed as per the existing law. So under the existing law, which law is applicable? State excise duty is applicable on liquor. So that law will still continue, and one has to discharge the tax liability on that sale of liquor. So in respect of a restaurant industry, now they have to follow both the law, existing law as well as the GST law. Under the existing law, whenever they serve the liquor to the customer, then at that point of time they have to adhere to the old law. At the time of serving of food or beverages, the GST law will come into the picture, and this is how it will function. Then basket of petroleum product namely crude, HSD, motor spirit, natural gas and ATFs are out of the GST regime. They have been specifically kept out and not covered within the GST. But LPG is not covered. जो residential use and commercial use के लिए LPG liquefied gas है, that is not that will be covered under the GST, and it would be applicable at applicable rate. Then the person who is exclusively engaged in the business of supply, which are either non-taxable or wholly exempt from tax, they are also need not have to register under the GST. And last one is the agriculturist, to the extent of supply of produce out of cultivation of land. So agriculturists, they are the most beneficial person in our India. They are not required to discharge income tax liability. VAT was also not applicable, excise duty was not applicable, and now the GST. But still the surprising fact is that they are doing the suicide. I don't know how it happens. Having understood who are the person who are required to take registration and who are not required to take registration, next is the which place needs to be registered. It's very important. Which place needs to be registered? Yeah, you want to ask something? The law says that every supplier shall be liable to be registered under GST in the state or a union territory from where he makes taxable supply of goods or services or both. So he has to register that place, that means that business place of business from which he makes a supply of goods or services both. So the next question would be, which is the place which one needs to understand, which is the place of business. So they have defined what do you mean by place of business. So it says a place of business is a place from where the business is ordinarily carried on and includes a warehouse, a godown or any other place where a taxable person stores his goods, supplies or receives goods or services or both. Or a place where taxable person maintains his books of account, or a place where taxable person is engaged in the business through an agent by whatever name code. So this is a place of business. So that means from or the business which is ordinarily carried out, that place needs to be registered. Now let us take an example. A chartered accountant has his office in Ghatkopar, and he has kept one office in town site Fountain just to collect the documents from the client, so that it would be easier for the client to drop the documents. Now the question arises, which place needs to be registered? The Ghatkopar office, which is the main place of business where all the partners sits, that place needs to be registered, or a place which is there in the Fountain, which is just an admin office wherein only the documents has to be received by the client, for the client, on behalf of client, that place also needs to be registered. Which place needs to be registered? Ghatkopar. So which is that fountain place? That is an additional place. But from the additional place also, first of all, that place needs to provide the supply or services, supply of goods or services. Then only that place is considered to be an additional place. Say that place is merely an go down for me. All records of my client's files I am keeping over there in my fountain office. Then what will happen? Can you say that place is for supplying the goods or services? Obvious reply is no. So you cannot consider the second place should be providing the services. Let's take another example. A person is a very wealthy person. He is having an immovable property all over India. At 10 places he is having an immovable property. And he resides in Ghatkopar. Ghatkopar is a very rich area. So now tell me, which is the place of business? All the places were lovely. Or only one place. What is place of business? Place of business is a place wherein the management sits. All the controls and decisions have to be taken. That place is considered to be a place of business. Or can you say that all the properties are place of business? To my mind, no, that's not a right way of looking into it. All other places are merely an establishment. That is not a fixed place of establishment also. And accordingly, that place need not to be registered. Now, how do we arrive at? So, we have to take into consideration another concept which is known as a location of supplier. This is again a concept which has been lifted from the service tax law. Because in order to determine whether a transaction is an interstate transaction or an intrastate transaction, one has to look into two conditions. Number one, place of supplier and the place of supply. And then it will determine which is the place. So in order to understand what is the location of the supplier of service, we have to understand the definition. What it says. It's place where a supply is made from a place of business for which the registration has been obtained. Then the location of such place of business is the location of the supplier. That means in my example, Ghatkopar office, from where the supply of services are provided, that place has to be registered. Second, where supply is made from a place other than place of business for which registration has been obtained, the location of such fixed establishment. Now the word where supply is made from a place other than place of business. So my fountain office in my given example, does it supply any services? Obvious reply is no. Though it is a fixed establishment, but that doesn't provide any services. So just a minute, can I just complete this definition? Third, where a supply is made from more than one establishment, whether the place of business or fixed establishment, then the location of the establishment most directly concerned with the provision of supply, that place will be the supply of service. And last, in the absence of any such place, the location of the usual place of residence of that supplier needs to be considered. So in order to consider the place of supply, we have to consider this four position, that where he will be covered and which place needs to be determined. So the general thought which is there in our mind, they have to kept it aside and we have to strictly follow in this manner. Then and then only we will get a proper reply for that. Yes sir, now tell me.
Collection of documents from the client, is it not a service?
Collection of document is not a service. So first of all, in order to constitute within the definition of supply, first of all there has to be one of the important ingredients is there has to be a consideration for that. Now when a client gives you the document to you, whether in your office or at your office which is there in Fountain, are you charging anything, sir? Or it's free?
No sir, it is consolidated charge.
Just for the collection it is a consolidation charges, or the services of filing of return is the charges? So you mean to say that for filing of the return, I will charge X amount for my transportation, X amount for my electricity. Do you say like that? I have my doubts, sir. That kind of thing you can extend.
Sir, second example which you do, sir. Yeah, last one. Second example, if you do the person owning the house property or property on
correct.
And is staying at Ghatkopar.
Right.
But then you say according to you the Ghatkopar is a place where he has to pay a registration, not the place in Ahmed. But we are not putting the location of the supply is happening, we cannot say supply is happening. but all the locations we have got a property, that analysis or logic will not apply?
No, so I have said that my principal place of business from where the decisions has been taken. That is GATCO, right? All other places don't provide the services. What services are providing? Nothing. But for all practical purpose, now again a practical hint, when the law doesn't work, we have to go out for the practical also. Now say for example, when a rent, maintenance charges receipt has been received for that place, right? Now what will happen? Whether it would be issued in that place name or it would be issued in the name where the person resides, where it would be. Naturally, where I am reside, the GATCO person, it would be in the name and address of that GATCO person, so that also will not have problem. But in respect of goods, say for example that my immovable property is located in Delhi, and in Delhi suppose I procure certain goods for the consumption of that my immovable property, then naturally he will not issue me the invoice of the GATCO person. Suppose if he issues, but then also local law has to be levied. And then at that point of time, probably the input tax credit would be a problem. So for all practical purpose, it is advisable that you register all the places so that input tax credit which are there, that can be freely transferred by way of a mechanism of input service distributor. But not by law, just for practical. But even under the service tax law, same problem exists as of today also. You cannot take an example of a construction industry. They are having various sites all over the India. Then what they will do? Whether they need to take the registration at all places. Obvious reply is no, they need not. But for practical purpose to avail the input tax credit, we advise our client that you register, otherwise input tax credit may lose. That's the reason. But technically, no. Then centralized registration. Concept of centralized registration is not there as was there under the service tax law, and therefore one has to mandatorily go under the input service distributor mechanism, which I have already explained, and through that mechanism the credit will be distributed. Now having understood who are the person who is required to register, who are the person who is not required, which place needs to be registration, now real registration has to be executed. Now procedural thing will start. So the law provides that every person who is liable to be registered within 30 days, he has to make an application for the registration before the proper officer. Now when he makes an application, the application has to be in REG 01 form. While applying the registration, he has to first of all submit three things. Number one, mobile number and two things, mobile number and email ID. Now why that is required? So the law says that yes, whenever you furnish the mobile number and email ID, then we will give you the authentication code. So one OTP would be sent by the system GST and net portal, and one has to ensure that yes, the person, he is the right person whose mobile number and email ID has been given, so that transaction would be authenticated. And then once one reference number would be generated, and that reference number needs to be given in that application form, and that application form needs to be prepared. That application form consists of only 12 pages that needs to be filed by all the people. Though we say that we are in a paperless transaction, less paper, but then also 12 pages form needs to be filled in by all the taxpayer. When he prepares the form, along with the form, he has to attach the documents and details also along with the forms. That means electronically he has to upload the form. Once the form has been uploaded, the GST officer will verify the application within 3 working days. Once you file today the application form, uploaded it, within 3 working days he will verify whether all the documents which is required for the purpose of registration is correct or not. Now here the word says 3 working days. What is the logic of 3 working days?
If he works.
Huh?
If he works.
If
he works.
If he works. Okay. The Modi ke Raj mein everyone has to work. Not only he, everyone has to work. The logic behind the concept of 3 working days, I understand that when Saturdays, Sundays are there, so that has to be excluded. But in respect of every state, we are having holidays everywhere. Say for example, in 1st May, suppose in Maharashtra is holiday, May Day, but in the other state it may be working. So in order to have that indiscrimination, they have said 3 working days, so it would be applicable to all. Because now previously we are, though the nation is one, as in India, but laws are different, procedures were different. Now we are under the GST law, new law. So it says one nation, one tax, everything one. Tax rate is not one, unfortunately. That has to be there. So now the law is uniform, try to be uniform. Now suppose if on verification of the application, if the officer feels that some of the documents are not proper, say for example scanned copy of the document is not legible, then he will ask the person that you again resubmit the documents, that is called known as a deficiency memo. That would be given in form number REG 3. Then 7 days time limit will be provided to the taxpayer to rectify the defects in which is listed in the deficiency memo, and then he has to submit it. If he fails to do that within 7 working days, then his application will be liable to be rejected. But if his application is fine, then he will be issued a registration certificate which is known as a GSTN number, and that would be issued in form number GSTR 06. So that would be a final registration certificate. So this is how the whole registration process is there on. Now another very important thing is that suppose if I have applied for the registration or the GST law, CGST law, sorry, and suppose it is rejected, then it is deemed that under the SGST law also your application is rejected. Now why such kind of law is there, I fail to understand. Because at one side we said that it is a one law, CGST or SGST, that is only for a namesake, then why there is a need for 2 things? So this also have a question whether we need to file 2 application of registration. The obvious reply is no, form is only one. Then how can it be that once I apply for the CGST, then if that application is rejected, my SGST will also be cancelled? Don't able to understand what is the logic behind that thing. So this is the whole process of registration. Now after having the registration number, one more duty which has been casted on the taxpayer, that he has to display his certificate of registration at the prominent location at his principal place of business and at every additional place of business. तो उनको registration certificate बाहर लगाना है अपने business, principal place of business and every additional place of business. That is not only the thing. Even he has to mention his GSTI number, registration number, that also needs to be displayed on the board, name board, exhibited at the entry of his principal place of business as well as every additional place of business. So now whenever after the GST era, 1st July 2017, we go to the offices, first of all we say name board in English, then in Maharashtrian, then below that we will see the name of the GSTI certificate, then below that we will see the CIN, GSTI number. Now if it is a corporate office for 10 entities, then just understand they have to buy a separate place for that to place all the things. That's how it will operate. I don't know when we are in the era of digitalization, everything computerization, uploadation, and then still also they want such kind of thing that yes, that board has to be displayed. Why? Probably it's like that whenever the CC camera is displayed, then the board is mandatory that you have to, this place is under the surveillance of the cameras. It is like that. You are entering into the premises of a GST dealer, so be aware. Then next thing is the returns. After having registered yourself, so next thing is the return. So really everyone has to file the return. What is the need of filing of return? Why we should file the return? Once I pay the tax, doesn't it suffice? No, the obvious reply, everyone has to file the return. You don't have choice. So which returns one has to file? It says every registered person is required to file 3 kinds of return. Number 1, however, the other returns are also there, but this is a general. Details of outward supply, that is his sales register. Details of inward supply, that is his purchase register. And last one is the return, which is the combination of sales side as well as the purchase side, for the prescribed tax period. Then further it says that even UN agencies have to file the return for the month during which they make purchases. Now why these UN agencies are required to file the return? They are providing any supplying goods or services? Obvious reply is no. But they are procuring goods or services from a vendor, and at that point of time vendor may charge in GST. Now since they are on their output side their tax liability is nil, but since they are paying on the input side they are eligible for the refund, so that's why they have to obtain the registration number. Then last thing is that common return is prescribed for CGST, SGST, IGST and UTGST. So only one single return is there for all purpose. So now under the existing law you have to file return for under the excise law, under the VAT law, under the service tax law, सबके लिए अलग-अलग return भरना है. Now only one return which is known as a GST 1, 2 and 3. Where life would be very simple. Now let's see types of return. The law provides that every registered taxable person have to furnish the details of outward supplies electronically either by himself or through a common portal, either directly or through a facilitation center affected during the tax period and affected during earlier tax period for each registered place. That means he has to upload the details of his sales register either by himself on the electronic common portal either directly or through facilitation center. Now what is this facilitation center? All these GSPs which are there, 35 GSPs has been appointed by them. You can also file the return through these GSPs. Now why GSPs are there? Any idea? These GSPs have been appointed so that in respect of those companies who we are having a huge data, 10,000 invoices per day, then it would become difficult for them to upload the data at the end of the day. So what these GSPs will do, they will save the data for those service providers and collect it, and at the appropriate time they will upload it to the GST and corporate. Further, there are certain categories of taxpayers who doesn't have that computer or an electronic network system with them. So they will provide that information to GST and GST will help them as a facilitation center and they will upload the data on behalf of the customer. Further, it says you did not have to give the detail for the current tax period, but also the tax period of the earlier tax period. That means suppose today I am in the month of April, then I may incorporate the data for the month of October 2017 also. I am treating that we are today in April 2018 and presuming 17 is the date. Then I can give the data of 17 also, that is known as a matching thing that I will come at some later point of time. This detail has to be provided for each registered place. So that means if I am having a 10 registered place, then I have to file the details at 10 different places. So 10 return मेरे जाना चाहिए. This detail has to be furnished in form number GSTR1 and this detail has to be furnished by the 10th of the next May. So today we are on the 28th of April. So by 10th of May we have to submit this sales register. Now who is not required to file detail? It says all input service distributor, non-resident taxable person, registered person discharging tax liability under composition levy, or a person who is required to deduct tax or a person who is required to collect the tax at source. इनको monthly ये output liability का return display upload नहीं करना है. Now what details needs to be given? This is very important. Details shall include invoice wise details. So अभी हमें invoice wise detail देंगे. What details we need to give? Interstate and intrastate supplies made to registered taxable person. That means all B2B transaction. B2B, business to business transaction, whether it's intrastate or intrastate, detail has to be given. Invoice wise detail has to be given. Okay? Then interstate supply with the invoice value of more than 2.5 lakhs made to the unregistered purchase. 2 lakh से ऊपर का invoice है and you have done an interstate transaction with an unregistered person, then detail has to be given invoice wise. Second, what you have to give? Consolidated details. पहले ये invoice wise detail थी, अभी consolidated details देंगे. Which consolidated details? It says intrastate supplies made to an unregistered person for each rate of tax, and then that is called as a B2C transaction, business to consumer transaction. That means, for example, if you go to a Karyana shop, general store, there the end user is there who doesn't have either may have GSTN number or may not have GSTN number. So in that respect, they say that you need not have to give the bill-wise detail, but consolidated details, and at the end of the day, you have to take it the total, and that bifurcation would be as per tax rate-wise. Next, state-wise interstate supplies with invoice value less than rupees 2.5 lakhs made to an unregistered person for each rate of tax. Now here also a transaction with an unregistered person needs to be provided. And third is the debit and credit notes, if any, issued during the month for which invoice issued previously. So debit note, if any you have received, that also detail you need to provide it in your output service liability. Now once you have uploaded this detail onto the GST and network, then GST and network, what it will do, it will give all the details of this supplies to the person who has received the services in the form GSTR 2A after the 10th of the next month. That means, say for example, if I have sold the goods to Pranav Kapadia, then in that respect my sale is to Pranav, so it would become a purchase for the Pranav buyer. So once I have uploaded the details of my sales on the 10th, then on the 11th, the GST and network will send the detail to Pranav Kapadia that this is the goods or services which you have procured from Ashit Shah. Then what will happen? Then Pranav has to accept it whether 1 lakh rupees, suppose I have sold the goods of worth rupees 1 lakh. Then Pranav has to accept whether 1 lakh rupees which has been mentioned in the invoice is correct or not. If he feels that no, the amount which has been charged by me is excess, it should be 90,000 only, then what he will do? He will have to rectify it or edit it, and he can also delete it also. So उन्होंने बताया कि 90,000 है, so he will write over that 90,000 rupees and he will again send that details back to me. Then next, registered taxable person not allowed to furnish the details of outward supplies during the period from the 11th to 15th of the month succeeding to that period. Now he cannot file the details from 11th to 15th of his sales register, because till that point of time all outer inward purchase details has to be given. Then this I have already said, that on receipt of the details in GST or of the inward supplies, recipient may add, correct or delete if any in the details after the 10th of the next month, and such corrected details would be communicated to the supplier in form GSTR 1A. That means then Pranav will inform me that this is the 90,000 rupees which I have to accept it or reject it. Now suppose if I reject it, then both the transaction will not match. If both the transaction doesn't match, then Pranav will not be able to claim the input tax credit on the procurement of goods worth rupees 1 lakh. But I have to discharge my tax liability on 1 lakh rupees. And as soon as both the transactions are matched with each other, at that point of time, Pranav has to pay the tax. So the next question is, what is the time limit within which this transaction has to be rectified? So it says that if any details furnished for any tax period and remain unmatched, the supplier will, upon discovery of any error or omission, rectify such error or omission. When it will be rectified? Before the due date of furnishing the return for the month of September, following the end of the financial year to which the details pertain, or furnishing of the annual return, whichever is earlier. So basically 18 months time period would be available. Say for example, in the month of April, suppose the transaction has been made between me and Pranav, then what will happen? In the month of April, the transaction doesn't match. So ultimately, by the end of the September month of the next financial year, that has to be rectified. Or the filing of the annual return, that is 31st December, whichever is again. If the transaction doesn't match, Pranav will lose the credit. This is so very important concept over here is the matching of the transaction. Unless and until transaction matches, then if it doesn't matches, you are not able to get the credit of the sale. The transaction will be a futile exercise. So this is a very novel concept which has been introduced in the GST law. This is just like a 26As which is there under the Income Tax Act. If that credit is there, then and then only you are eligible to take the TDS credit and not otherwise. Barabar sir? It is just like a matching, otherwise you are gone. You have to rectify. I think no time limit for rectification in this 26As. You can rectify any time. Right? But here the time limit has been provided. Now this time period of 10 days, if the SSE feels that this time period is too short for me, then he can apply to the commissioner that sir, please enhance this time limit because this is too less a period for me. And if he is satisfied, then he can increase the time limit for the same. Now let us see the format of this GSTR1. So what is this? First of all, GSTI number will be there. The name of the taxable person and aggregate of the taxable person in the previous finance. This will be auto-populated. Now the column, row number 3, aggregate turnover of the taxable person in the previous financial year. While filing the return for the first period, say for July 2017, that will not be having impact because last year turnover may be something else. At that time, it may be exempt under the GST. It would be taxable. So to my mind, that won't have any impact. It would be applicable only from the August 2000 and next year. Then period or month of the return would be provided. Now the real details. What details we have to give? First is the GSTI number or UIN number. That means the registration number of the supplier, vendor if we have sold the good. Or UIN means a unified identification code in respect of UN agents. That number is to be provided. Then the details of invoice has to be provided. What invoice? Details, number, date, value, whether it's goods or services. Then you have to also mention the HSN code or SSC. HSN code, whenever there is a unified harmonious number which has been issued by and accepted in the internationally accepted numbers which are there. In the Central Excise Tariff Act, these numbers are provided. This would be not new to the manufacturers because they know under which chapter heading it is provided. But sometimes traders may not be in a position to know what is my GST HSN code, but they can very well get it from the Central Excise Tariff Code. SSC code is the Service Accounting Code. Those who are practicing in service tax, they must be knowing that they have given numbers to the services. How many services are there at present? 130. Services are for n number of services are taxable. Only 130 numbers has been provided, right? Only 119, 118, 170 specific heads are there, and 118 is the other than taxable service, right? This is how the code is. So 118 service codes are there. That number we have to mention over there. Then taxable value, whatever is there. Then we have to identify whether the transaction is an interstate transaction or an intrastate transaction. If it happens to be an interstate transaction, you have to fill in this detail. You have to mention the rate and amount. If it happens to be an intrastate transaction, then you have to bifurcate between CGST and SGST. CGST you have to mention the rate and amount, and SGST rate and amount. Then comes POS. That is the place of supply. This is to be that only if it is different from the location of the recipient. Now that means what place of supply says. This concept would be more important when the bill to ship to concept is there. That means billing is to one person and shipping or transport is to another person. That is known as bill to ship to concept. Then we have to give this detail, otherwise it is not required. That means, say for example, in the same analogy of me and Pranav, in all the example now we both are there. Huh? I am in the state of Maharashtra, he is also in the state of Maharashtra. He has said that please give me the goods worth rupees 10 lakhs rupees. I said okay, no problem, and I have sent him the chemical. Whenever the goods have started moving, he has said, now please don't send me the goods. You give the goods to the Mr. Vikram Bhai, who is in the state of Gujarat. So Gujarat mujhe bhejna padega. Then in this respect, the recipient is different and the recipient of the goods is different and the recipient of service is different. So in that respect, we need to give this detail over here. Then indicate if supply attracts the reverse charge. We have to also indicate if the supply is reverse charge, when it will be this needs to be filled. As I have explained you earlier, that law provides that whenever you are procuring the goods or services from an unregistered dealer, then the registered dealer needs to discharge the tax liability. Now when he is discharging the tax liability, the law requires that that person, that is a registered person, has to issue the invoice to him and discharge the tax liability and put it on his output service liability. Because the tax भरना है, output it is deemed to be a supplier of services, तो उसे bill बनाना है और यहाँ रखना है. So now the question will come, do I have to maintain the same series of invoices? Law again clarifies, don't worry, in respect of URD sale, you can have a different serial number invoices and that serial number has to be provided. Then tax on this invoice is paid under provisional assessment. Sometimes the rate of tax or the item is such that you are not in a position to identify. Then in that respect, you may discharge the tax liability at one particular rate and put it under the head tax under the provisional assessment. And last is the GST of the e-commerce operator. If the transaction is with e-commerce operator, that detail needs to be given. So only this much detail every month we have to extract it. First only. So just imagine a company which is having 5,000 invoices per day or 500 invoices per day. What will happen? So what is required? But no, don't worry, nothing will happen. Your software should be robust enough to compile or extract all this information so that you need not have to worry. You would be ready on the very next day after the end of the month with all this detail. But for that matter, you have to take an keen interest in developing such software, in inputting such key in the details in a specific manner so that you need not have to have a problem when at the end of the month. So now the software and the hardware both will play a very important role in the consultants as well as businessman's office or an industrial office, that how it will operate. Because if that is not supportive, then believe me friends, the time will come that you have to shut down your business. Because without it, you cannot do the business. Next. Now, another table is 5A. So everywhere table number is there and 8 is there, which is known as a amendment to the Act. Amendment to the previous supply. Amendment to the details of output supplied to a registered person of earlier tax period. As I was telling you, that whenever you are in that outward supply, you have to not only put the transaction of the current tax period, but also of the previous tax period. That means whatever the difference is there in the invoice, either invoice was not recorded earlier, then you have to record over here. Either debit note or credit note has been issued for a transaction of an earlier period, that also you have to mention over here. So one of the best part over is the matching transaction. Again, here it says original invoice, GST number, and revise your original invoice. So whenever you are revising your invoice, you can put the details over here. Whenever you are issuing debit note or credit note, you have to give the details over here. So here now what will happen? That every transaction will not only match, it has to be tagged also. Now tagging is also important. You cannot just put the transaction as it is. Okay. Then next is taxable outward supply to a consumer where place of supply is other than the state where the supplier is located, that is interstate supplier, and invoice value is more than rupees 2.5 lakhs. So here I have said that whenever an interstate transaction is there and the invoice value is 2.5 lakhs, invoice wise detail needs to be given. So here invoice wise detail needs to be given. Here the recipient state code is there. Every state has their unique code number. Maharashtra is 27, 21 is for Gujarat, 11 for Delhi, and so on. And then the same detail needs to be provided over here. Here again amendment, if any change is there, then that needs to be provided over here. So another important thing, that every transaction has to be by way of a debit note or credit note. It may so happen that I have supplied the goods to Pranav and he says 90,000 is the price. And that ultimately after the end of 4 years, we have ultimately decided that yes, chalo 95,000 pe settlement karte. Now yes, now in my books records 1 lakh rupees is there. Now we have to do 95,000, so naturally he has to issue me a debit note and I will issue him a credit note worth rupees 5,000. So I have to do it in the month in which we have finalized the transaction. That is in the 4th month, each of us has to exchange the debit note and credit note. And that has to be again matched by all of us, otherwise it will not match. So आज क्या हो रहा है? आज फाइनेंशियल ईयर एंड ऑफ द ट्रांजैक्शन में कुछ पैसा नहीं है, चलो डिस्काउंट में डाल दो. Without issuance or of debit note or credit note, we don't bother. But now that unilateral actions will not survive. If you do any unilateral actions by issuing debit note or credit note, that will not suffice, then your transaction will not be matched. So don't do that. For every transaction, there has to be a document, and that document has to be accepted by the other party. If the other party doesn't accept it, your transaction is failed. Taxable amount outward supplied to a consumer one here, B2C transaction, details has to be provided. Amendment to the taxable outward supply to a consumer of earlier tax period, that needs to be provided. Then ninth table is very important. It says nil rated, exempted and non-GST outward supply. So now again the bifurcation is required. Whether this transaction is interstate supply to a registered person or an unregistered person, intrastate transaction to a registered person and non-registered person. Then you have to identify whether it's goods or services, whether these are nil rated, whether these are exempted, and whether these are non-GST supplies. Now how it will help? It will help us while filing the annual return and reconciliation. At the end of the year, you have to file an annual return. Along with that annual return, you have to also file the reconciliation statement. That reconciliation statement will reconcile with your audited financial statement, which has been certified by an income tax auditor or statutory auditor. That has to be reconciled, and then they will be reconciled from this figure. So in all of your business activities are before the GST and authority. Then supplies exported, only the additional detail is the shipping bill, otherwise all details are the same. Then amendment to supplies exported, if there is any amendment in the export, then that also needs to be provided over here. Then here, tax liability arising on account of time of supply without issuance of invoice in the same period. What will come over here? When you are receiving advance, the law says if you are receiving advance for goods or services, you have to discharge the tax first and then issue the invoice. So at that point of time, you have to provide the details over here. Then amendment to tax liability arising on account of time of supply without issuance of invoice in the same tax period. Now the reverse converse is there. Then supply made through e-commerce portal or other companies. This is in respect of whenever you are doing a transaction with e-commerce transaction. Then invoices issued during the tax period, including invoices issued in case of inward supplies received from unregistered person liable to tax under reverse charge. So whenever you are buying from an unregistered person, that detail needs to be provided over here. Now why that details is required? These details are required so that now GST and porter will take care that who are the persons who are unregistered, so that they will keep a track whether really the turnover is threshold the limit or they are just escaping the tax. So from here also they will be able to generate the data, what is the turnover of that particular client. Then HSN number. In the return we have observed that one has to mention the HSN code. Now this HSN code consists of 8 digits. So now whether we have to give the full 8 numbers or 4 numbers or 2 numbers, that let us see what the law says. It says HSN code is not mandatory for a taxable person whose aggregate turnover is less than 1.5 crore. 1.5 crore के नीचे उसको HSN code देने की जरूरत है. If the turnover HSN shall be, if the gross turnover in the previous financial year is greater than 5 crore, then HSN should be of a minimum 4 digit. 5 crore से ऊपर है तो 4 digit देने का है. अगर 1 करोड़ और 1.5 करोड़ और 5 करोड़ के बीच में है, then in that respect 2 digit number is there, and this would be valid only for the 2 years of GST implementation. उसके बाद सारे numbers देने हैं. So now, if you observe that now many MSN companies are now giving the letters to their vendors that you please give us your HSN code number as well as the registration number under the GST. So they will creating the masters from now. So that at a later point of time when the PO is issued, they know that this PO should go to this particular person, his HSN code would be this only. So that there is no confusion at a later date. So this is how the one is to start creating awareness about the GST, that how it would help us in extracting the details in the best possible manner. So this was the supply side, GSTR1. 10 तारीख तक this has to be uploaded. Now let's see the inward side. Inward side is very simple. You need not have to bother. Why? Because whatever supply I have made, that would be the purchase of Pranav. So Pranav, what he has to do? He has to just observe, because automatically it would be popped up into his network that these are the purchases which he has made. So मेरा आ जाएगा आशित शाह के साथ 1 लाख रुपए का गुड्स लिया, ठीक है, फाइन, एंड ही विल एक्सेप्ट इट एंड his inward supply is ready. So he is not bothered. So one need not have to bother about the purchase side. Let's see whether it's right statement or not. So every registered person has to furnish the details of inward supply electronically through the common portal, either directly or through a facilitation center, affected during a tax period and affected during an earlier tax period for each registered place. सब place के लिए करना है. This return has to be uploaded by the 15th of the next month. 5 दिन में करना है, very easily हो जाएगा. आपको तो कुछ करना नहीं, आपको खाली ऑब्जर्व करना है. You don't have to key in the data. बड़ा इसलिए 5 दिन का टाइम दिया. Outward supply में 10 दिन का टाइम दिया, double the time. This is the logic. Government is very smart. What details needs to be provided? It says inward supply of taxable goods or services or both. Inward supply जो भी है naturally purchase उसी से हुआ. So now one has to also change the system also. आज की डेट में अकाउंटेंट क्या करता है, डायरेक्ट पेमेंट किया, परचेस अकाउंट डेबिट हो गया. फिक्स्ड एसेट्स में क्या है, वो परचेस से रूट ही नहीं करेगा. So now all these things will not suffice. You have to pass each and every entry, whether it is for purchase of goods, whether purchase of expenses, or whether purchase of capital goods. Everything has to be routed through a purchase account. Then and then only you will get a proper report. Otherwise, you will be missed. So now you have to advise the client also that, boss, now we have to reconstruct your whole accounting system. We are there for you, so we are ready to serve you. More opportunity for us. GST will give too much opportunities. I am sure in these 3 days you must have visualized how much work is there. We will become a crorepati after going from there. Inward supplies of goods or services or both on which tax is discharged under reverse charge. See the smile on the face of everyone. Inward supplies of goods or services or both on which tax is to be discharged under RCM. RCM में टैक्स भरना है, उसकी डिटेल देनी है. Third, inward supplies of goods or services or both taxable under IGST Act or on which the tax is payable under 3 of the Customs Act. ICS transaction, Vikram bhai must have taught you. I don't know about ICS transaction. On which IGST is to be payable. Fourth, debit note or credit note received in respect of such supply. That detail is to be provided. Now which details further? Debit or credit note received in respect of such supplies during a tax period after the 10th but before the 15th of the succeeding tax period. 10 के 15 के बीच में जितनी भी डेबिट नोट और क्रेडिट नोट है that you have to upload it. हाँ, अभी एक चीज आपको करनी है, ऑब्जर्व तो कर लिया. ऑब्जर्व करने के बाद आपको what you have to do, you have to identify which credit is eligible for taking the input tax credit and which credit is not eligible. So how you will say? So you have to identify while filling the form GSTR2 which credit is ineligible credit from the invoice level. Invoice level means invoice में से पता चलेगा कि this credit is not eligible. That is, for example, if you are buying a motor car, whatever GST you have paid, you are not eligible for the input tax credit. So invoice पे से ही पता चल जाएगा, so that credit needs to be not to be taken in the return. That means this is a self-assessed return. So SSC has to identify which input tax credit he will take and what credit he will not take. Second is not on invoice-based level. That means whenever a supplier is providing the goods or services, there are certain products which are either exempt from the tax, GST, or they are not liable to be taxed, or they are exempted. Now in that respect, we have to do a proportionate thing. Or sometimes the product may be used for business purpose and some part of the product is used for non-business purpose. Then in that respect, the whole credit will not be available. Then what is to be done? It has to be credit is eligible on a proportionate basis. Then in that respect, that credit needs to be disallowed from that inward register only. So this is the only exercise which you have to do while filing the inward register. Again, Commissioner, on an application, if he feels that this time limit is too short, then he may increase it. Then details of supplies modified, deleted or included by the recipient and furnished shall be communicated to the supplier concerned in form GSTR1. As in my earlier example, when Pranava has done the editing of 90,000 rupees, then he will again communicate to me in form GSTR1A that, yes, boss, you please rectify yourself, don't put 1 lakh, you put 90,000 only. So this is what has been communicated, will have to be communicated. Again, if any rectification has to be made or any invoice is left to take the credit, then in that respect the time period has been provided. Same time period is there, 18 months time period is there. We can rectify it on or before the 30th September or 31st December, whichever is earlier. Now let's see the form, how GSTR form to be filled. First one is from registered taxable person including supplies received from unregistered person in case of a reverse charge. So here we have to give the details of the goods or services acquired from registered taxable person as well as unregistered taxable person on invoice basis. So first one is the GSTN number and name of the unregistered supplier, because he must not have the GSTN, so his name has to be given. Then invoice wise detail, same detail which was there in the supply, it has to be number, date, value, whether it's goods or services, HSN code or SSC, taxable value. If it is an interstate transaction, IGST has to be derived. If it is an intrastate, CGST and SGST. Again, POS, same thing. Now here, eligibility of ITC as input, capital goods, input service or none. So now we have to identify which is this product on which I am taking the input tax, whether it is a capital goods, whether it's an input or whether it's an input service. That I have to mention. Then it says total tax available as ITC, IGST, CGST and SGST. Out of this total tax, how much ITC is available for this month? That we have to identify. Now under which circumstances this would arise? Let's take an example. Before that, 1 minute flat. One of the conditions for availing the input tax credit is the person has to receive the goods or services, and number two, he must have the invoices with him. These are the one of the condition of availing the input tax credit. What are they? Number one, he must have received the goods or services, and number two, he must have the invoice for that goods or services. Now let's take an example that I wanted to procure one customized machinery, and I have given an order to the vendor. Vendor says that it will take 1 year period of time to deliver to repair a customized machinery. I said, okay, no problem, since this is a customized thing, so naturally it will take time. Further he says that you have to pay me, and that cost is say 50 lakhs rupees. He says that 10% advance you have to give me. I said, okay, not an issue, because I want that machinery desperately. Further he says that after 6 months period of time you have to pay me a 50%, and on the delivery balance 50% needs to be payable. I said, okay, no problem. And on the immediately I have given him 10% advance. Now you know that under the GST law, whenever a person receives the advance towards the goods or services, he has to discharge the tax liability. So that person will discharge the tax liability. The law further provides that whenever a person receives the advances and discharge the tax liability, he has to issue one voucher to the person who has given the money. So he has issued me a voucher. Now the question arises, whether can I get the credit for the same in that, because I have made the payment of 10 lakhs rupees. The obvious reason for the taking of the credit is two conditions: goods or services should be available with me, and number two, invoice should be there. Neither of the condition is with me, so I cannot take the credit. So in that month I have to say that this is the total tax credit available. But out of this, eligible is how much? Nothing. Then again when I pay the 40%, at that point of time also the same thing, I say my total tax credit is this much, but eligibility is nothing. At the 12 months end of time when I receive the machinery and the invoice, at that point of time I would be eligible to take the credit. So all this detail needs to be kept properly and then put it over here and take the credit. So this leads to a litigation. So now this is again a scope for all of us, that how to deal with it. Then if the transaction is with registered person, then everything would be auto-populated here. All these details will be auto-populated. You need not have to worry. But if the transaction is unregistered person, then you have to fill in the details. So that's what I have said, that you have to just observe. If you are doing a transaction with registered person like Pranav, no problem, you are happy. You need not have to do anything. You have to just fill in this ITC column. That's it. Then amendment to the details of inward supplies received in an earlier tax period की कुछ भी है, then that value has to be. So this gives another point that whenever you wanted to give the details of the earlier tax period, you need not have to revise the return. So under the GST, concept of revision of return is not there. Under the present VAT laws, n number of times you can revise the return. Bindas. तो ऐसे यहाँ नहीं चलेगा. कभी भी आप रिवाइज करो नहीं. Everything has to be on a real time basis. You have to, whenever you came to know that yes, I wanted to rectify this thing in that particular period, I up by issuing debit note or credit note, you can revise it, not otherwise. Then capital goods received from overseas, that is import of goods, you have to give the details of bill of entry or import report, IGST, eligibility of ITC as input for capital. Suppose आपने मोटर कार मंगावी है तो आपको क्रेडिट नहीं मिलेगी. Total IGST available as IGST and ITC भी available for this. ITC you need to quantify. Services received from a supplier located outside India, import of services. Under the existing law, import of service में who pays the tax? Person who receives the services. Probably this kind of law will also be there under the GST, that the person who receives the services he needs to discharge the tax liability. Then amendment in the services received from a supplier located outside India. Then supplies received from a composition tax payable person, unregistered person and other exempt meal or non-GST supply. Just हमने वहाँ देखा supply side में that we have to give the details for the nil rated, exempted, non-taxable. Here one more category is that in respect of person you are buying the goods from a composition, the person who is discharging tax liability under the composition scheme, वो 50 lakhs के turnover नीचे है. Then you have to give the details for those then also. Then ISD credit received when an input service distributor is there, when he receives the credit by that unit, they have to give the details over here. TDS credit, just like 26As, it would also be an auto-populated. This shall be auto-populated. Whatever that other person has filed the GSTR1, on that basis, all this information would be over here. Then TCS credit received same way as the TDS received. Then ITC received on an invoice on which partial credit is availed earlier, that detail needs to be put in over here. Then yes, so this is what about the GSTR2. So अपना सब supply side, we have filed the return. On the input side, purchase side also our return is filed. So now what remains? Remains is the main return. Let's go to that. GSTR3, GSTR1 कर दिया, 2 कर दिया, अभी 3, right? Serially. Every registered taxable person have to furnish the return electronically through a common portal, either directly or through a facilitation center of inward and outward supply, ITC availed, tax payable, tax paid, and such other particulars as may be prescribed. This return needs to be filed by the 20th of the next month. So 10 तारीख तक sales अपलोड कर दिया, 15 तारीख तक हमने परचेसेस कर दिया, 20 तारीख तक हमें रिटर्न करना है 5 दिन में. सिंपल टास्क है. सेल्स आ गया आउटपुट साइड, ऑटो पॉपुलेटेड हो गया परचेज साइड, ठीक है. फिर आपका क्या रहेगा? इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट भी आपने बता दिया इन दैट इनवर्ड रिप्लाई. सो व्हाट इज रिमेन इज द टैक्स पेएबल, सो दैट यू हैव टू पे एंड फाइल द रिटर्न बाय 20th of the next. You have to file the return and you have to pay the tax also. Part A of the return shall be electronically generated on the basis of information furnished to GSTR1, 2 and other liabilities of the preceding tax period. ये सारा auto populated हो जाएगा. You did not have to worry. Taxable person have to discharge his tax liability, interest, penalty, late fees by debiting electronic cash ledger or credit ledger as per the details contained in Part B. So that means while filing the return, the next question is whether an assessee, due to any reason, doesn't have funds within his electronic cash ledger or in a bank step down, then whether he can file the return. The obvious reply is yes, he can file the return. But only the problem is that it won't be considered as a valid return file, and the other person who has purchased the goods, he will not be eligible to take the credit of the sale. So it is as good as non-filing of the return. Okay? So return has to be filed by paying tax. Then a registered taxable person have to furnish the return for every tax period whether or not any transaction is there. So nil return भी हमें फाइल करना है. ये CST रिटर्न जैसा नहीं है कि अगर नील रिटर्न है तो नहीं करेगा, चल गया. you have to mandatorily file the return. So all the three return, whether you have any transaction or loan. If there is any omission or incorrect particulars in the return is fine, then that has to be rectified in once that has been noticed, and the registered taxable payer has to discharge the tax liability along with interest if there is a short payment of tax. Then when this discrepancy has to, what is the time limit to edit the information? This has to be rectified before the due date of furnishing of the return for the month of September. Same time limit. यहाँ उन्होंने quarter भी दे दिया है, because in respect of a composition tax dealer, even they have to file the return और उनकी time limit है 3 quarterly. That's why quarter has been reversed. For actual date of furnishing the relevant annual return, that is 31st December, whichever is earlier. Same time limit which was there for sales side or a purchase side, it would be applicable. Then registered taxable payer person shall not be allowed to furnish a return for a tax period if the return for any of the previous tax period has not been furnished by him. Very beautiful. आप कोई भी रिटर्न कभी भी नहीं फाइल कर सकते हो. It has to be go in a chronological manner. ऐसे बोलेंगे अप्रैल मंथ का रिटर्न मेरे को फाइल नहीं करना है, पैसा नहीं है. लेकिन मई में I have the tax credit available with me. So first of all I will pay the May month return. April month I will pay later. No, that is how you cannot. The system will not allow you to file the return. So now how the outward and inward supply process, shortly I have described it. First of all, supply of goods or services by the supplier to the recipient. Then declaration of details of outward supplies in GSTR1, supplier को file करना है. Then auto population of details of ITC in GSTR2 of the recipient, that will go on the 11th. Verification, validation, modification or detection of the auto-populated ITC by the recipient. If the recipient feels that there needs to be any addition, deletion, then he can do it. Then he has to ascertain of the eligible ITC and uploading of the details of the GSTR2 by the recipient. Then ascertainment and payment of net GST. Then he has to match the transaction. Outward supplies of the supplier, inward supply of the recipient, IGST paid or input of goods, debit not issued by the supplier, and then communication of the matched ITC to the recipient. If this whole process is completed, matching concept transaction, then that transaction would be completed, both the persons would be happy, he will get his credit, I will get my money. Because unless and until Pranav will get the credit, he will not remit me my tax invoice, so both of us are under the distress condition. So now because of this matching condition concept, what will happen? Now every day, after the end of the month, what will happen? Person has to first of all see his electronic cash ledger, that how much amount is there in my cash ledger. Then he has to say how much credit is there in my electronic credit ledger. So what is there in the electronic credit ledger? All my taxes which has been paid while procuring goods or services. वो सारी आ गई कि नहीं आ गई? That Pranav bhai will check. Because whether Ashit Shah has filed the return or not. If he has not filed, then he will communicate with me. आजकल खाली क्या WhatsApp से ट्रांस मेरे साथ बात करता था. अभी वो WhatsApp नहीं करेगा, मुझे कॉल करेगा. कि Ashit, please file the return so that I can get the credit. Otherwise, I will not get the credit. Then third thing, I have to say electronic credit liability register. What is this register? Whenever I upload my GSTR1, my sales register, whole tax liability will be auto-calculated and will go over there. Now the question is, who will maintain all this register? Electronic cash ledger, electronic credit ledger, electronic liability register. Please relax. This all would be prepared for us by the GST and network. We don't have to do anything. So please relax. What we have to do only after the end of the month, we have to wake up, अपना लैपटॉप चालू करो, पहले भगवान का नाम ले लो, लैपटॉप चालू कर दो, डैशबोर्ड में यू सी व्हाट इज द क्रेडिट इन माय इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कैश लेजर, क्रेडिट लेजर, लायबिलिटी लेजर, ठीक है. एंड देन फोर्थ वन इज द बैंक स्टेटमेंट. पैसा भी तो होना चाहिए टैक्स भरने के लिए. सो दैट फोर लेजर में अगर एवरीथिंग इज प्रॉपर, देन योर लाइफ इज इजी. अदरवाइज देन एवरीथिंग, फोन कॉल्स चालू, पर्सनल मीटिंग चालू, सब चीज चालू हो जाएगी, राइट. Now other miscellaneous return. Fourth one is the quarterly return for the composition taxpayer. That means the person who files the return under composition tax, he has to file quarterly return 18th of the next quarter. Then GSTR 5, periodic return by non-resident foreign taxpayer. 6 number, return for input service distributor, that is 15th of the next month. Return of the tax deducted at source, that is 10th of the next month. 10th क्यों रखा है? So that they will get the credit of the same source की date है 10th. तो भी for professionals, now due date. Every month तो return आ जाएगा अपना. तो 10, 15, 20 वो लग जाएगा. फिर महेंद्र भाई संग बोलेंगे मेरा TDS रिटर्न है, तो वो भी भरना है. तो that date is to be complied. ठीक है? Then what will happen? That on the quarter again problem will come because वहाँ composition dealer है, 50 lakhs के छोटे छोटे हैं, उनकी quarter है 18th है तो और एक date आ जाएगी. तो the July month, because quarter ends at July, then October, then January, then April would be very hectic month. 10, 15, 20, 18 TDS का रहेगा तो 15, then TDS, income tax TDS some different tax rate is there. So थोड़ा we have to adjust it, हाँ. थोड़ा. हाँ, इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न मुझे डेडलाइन याद नहीं है इसलिए पता नहीं है. TDS तो महेंद्र भाई को देख के TDS याद आ जाता है. Then rule 9, GSTR 9, I was talking about the annual return. That every registered taxable person shall furnish annual return electronic in form GSTR 9. 9 नंबर में हमें annual return भरना है. That means 12 return भर दिया. 13th return would be the annual return that has to be by the next financial year का 31st December तक भरना है. Now along with that annual return, the law provides that if the turnover of the taxpayer is more than 1 crore rupees, then along with that return one has to also submit the audited financial statement and reconciliation statement. मैंने जो आपको वहाँ दिखाया था, reconciliation with nil rated, exempted, non-taxable, all that reconciliation, small reconciliation has to be provided at the time of filing of return. So one more audit is there now. 31st day of December तक audit we have to do. GST audit. हाँ? Christmas holiday. अभी holiday भूल जाओ भाई. You have to work and work. So this annual return is there. And last is the final return. हाँ, इसके बाद कोई return नहीं. This is the final return. With them and the final return has to be paid. This is not to be paid by everyone. Only by those person who is cancels or surrenders his certificate of registration due to any reason, they need to file the final return. When they have to file within the period of 3 months of the date of cancellation or the date of cancellation of order, whichever is earlier, that this is the final return. So all this return needs to be filed for all the SSC. For each state wherein he is registered. So total कितने return हो गए? 3 monthly returns, 12 into 3, 36. Plus one final annual returns, 37 return. That is in one state. If you have your client multi-locational based client है, 5 जगह ऑफिस है, तो 37 into 5 कर दो. हाँ?
All 32 states.
अच्छा, all 32 से all 32. Okay, accepted. So basically you have to do the multiplication. So now we have to gear it up. Our office has to be geared up by way of an infrastructure, human intellectual, because how you can able to cope up. At present, I am sure every person over here has minimum 200 clients. 200 client minimum रहेंगे. उनके return, VAT return, service tax बहुत easily करते हैं. Now just imagine whether you are in a position to file 200 return in the 10th, 15th and 20th. तो वो जरा assess करना पड़ेगा. अगर आप that you are in a position to do that, absolutely fine. Then how you will do that? That is the next question. So for that matter, you must have proper infrastructure, or is without that you cannot do that. So all that needs is now it's a high time. All of us needs to understand this critical thing, whether we wanted to practice in GST or not. Otherwise, it won't help. किसी का वहाँ जॉब खाली रहेगा तो मेरे को करना है. Defaults in filing of return. Now naturally, if you folded, not filed the return, then what would be the procedure? Simple. What say? If you fail to furnish the outward supply, inward supply, final return, then the late filing fees, not penalty, late filing fees. So it is non-appealable. You have to file, no discrepancy. The assessing officer, on whatever genuine reason, he has no right to reduce it. So what is the late filing fees? Rupees 100 for every day during which such failure continues, subject to a maximum of rupees 5,000. So क्या हो जाएगा? एक रिटर्न लेट गया 5,000, आउटवर्ड सप्लाई 5,000, इनवर्ड सप्लाई 5,000, रिटर्न 15,000 रुपीज लेट फाइलिंग। फिर उसको मल्टीप्लाई करते जाइए if it is your default. For furnishing the annual return, the late filing fees is rupees 100 for every day during which such failure continues, subject to a maximum of rupees 0.25% of turnover in the state. That means अगर 32 स्टेट्स सर ने बताया वैसे है और 32 स्टेट्स में हमारा गलती से भी लेट हो गया, then you have to just do the calculation. So यहाँ GST में एक दूसरा है, you have to just calculate it. कि everything is automatic. Now having understood this returns part, now we have to understood what records needs to be maintained. अभी इतना सारा रिटर्न भरना है तो records तो भी कुछ रखना पड़ेगा, otherwise तो चलेगा नहीं. First of all, tax invoice. टैक्स इनवॉइस कभी बनाना है, कैसे बनाना है? नाउ टेल मी, पहले देखते हैं फिफ्थ क्वेश्चन. नाउ एज वी नो दैट दिस इज अ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज लॉ. गुड्स सर्विसेज लॉ नहीं ऐसा बोलना, गुड्स एंड सर्विस. सम पीपल से गुड्स सर्विसेज लॉ, सो इट्स नॉट लाइक दैट, इट्स गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज लॉ. सो इट्स अ कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज. तो यहाँ भी आपको हर एक लॉ में, रूल्स में, गुड्स के लिए अलग रूल्स, सर्विसेज के लिए अलग रूल्स है. सो हियर इनवॉइस में भी ऐसा ही है, गुड्स के लिए अलग रूल्स है, सर्विसेज के लिए अलग रूल्स है. सो पहले गुड्स के लिए देखते हैं. इट सेज दैट व्हेन द इनवॉइस नीड्स टू बी प्रिपेयर्ड, इट सेड रजिस्टर्ड टैक्सेबल पर्सन शैल इश्यू द टैक्स इनवॉइस बिफोर और एट द टाइम ऑफ removal of goods for supply to the recipient where the supply involves movement of goods. That means मेरा invoice बनना चाहिए before or at the time of removal of goods for the supply to the recipient where supply involves movement of goods. So now we have to understand what do you mean removal of goods. Removal goods terminology has been borrowed from the excise law. So what it says removal means? It means dispatch of goods for delivery by the supplier thereof or by any other person acting on behalf of such supplier. That means अगर dispatch किया transporter को by the supplier thereof or by the agent of that supplier, then it is known as a termed as a removal. Or collection of goods by the recipient thereof or any other person acting on behalf of some recipient. Sometimes the seller says that you have to lift the material from my factory or warehouse. Then in that it is also known as removal of goods. So at the time of removal, the invoice needs to be prepared immediately. Now tell me under the VAT laws, what is the law when the invoice has to be prepared? Is there any time limit has been provided that when the invoice has to be prepared? No time limit has been prepared. Under the service tax law, yes, time limit has been prescribed. Says within 30 days you have to, on the completion of service or provision of service or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier, you have to issue the invoice. Under the VAT law, such law was not there. Then how we were operating all these years under the BST and VAT law? It is based on some sale of goods or act. On that basis we do that. But nobody has questioned till that point of time. Now under this GST law, they are very specific. That as soon as the goods are removed, you have to issue the invoice. Then second, one exception is there. It says if there is no movement of goods, but the delivery of goods or making available thereof to the recipient in any other case, that means if there is no involvement of delivery, so movement of goods, then in that respect delivery or making available thereof would be considered as a date of removal. So that means suppose for example, if a Pranav says that I want 100 tons of chemicals, so I said okay, I will give it to you. So I have given him a DO that you please leave the material from my warehouse which is there on the Bhiwandi. So this is a symbolic delivery wherein there is no movement of delivery. Or other thing is that he has come to me and said, okay, this is the mobile, there is no mobile. He wants that, so I said, yes, this is the mobile. So where there is a delivery of the mobile immediately, there is no movement of goods, and accordingly that will cover. So at that point of time, the invoice needs to be prepared. Okay? In respect of export of goods, it shall carry an endorsement. On the export invoice, an endorsement should be there that it is supply meant for export on payment of GST, or supply meant for export under bond, or supply meant for export under letter of undertaking, or without payment of GST. So when you are supplying the goods, this endorsement on the invoice has to be there. Then tax invoice should contain description of goods, quantity and value of goods, tax charge thereon, and other particulars as provided in the invoice rules. So in invoice rules, so many particulars has been provided that I will come to you at a later some point of time. Then council may notify the category of goods and or supplies in respect of which tax invoice shall be issued within such time as may be prescribed. So now they have taken the power that in respect of certain category of service or supply, we will issue the separate time limit. So immediately nahi karna hai, so that they will notify when the act will come into the force. Now let us see in the respect of services, when to issue the invoice for the services. It's very simple because I am basically a service tax guy, so it attracts more. Registered taxable person shall issue an invoice before or after the provision of service, but within a period of 30 days from the date of supply of services. That means within the 30 days period of either provision of service or completion of service or receipt of payment, I have to issue the invoice. Supply of services by, however, there is an exception. If the supplier of services by an insurer or a banking company or a financial institution or an NBFC, then issue of invoice has to be within 45 days from the date of supply of service. उनके लिए 45 days दे दिए हैं. This is the same provision again in the service tax law. Now another important. Further it says that if the supplier of service is provided by an insurer, banking company or a financial institution or NBFC, telephone or telecom operator or other services notified by the government, when such service is provided to a distinct person, then they have to issue the invoice before or at the time such supplier records the same in his books of account or before the expiry of the quarter during which the supply was made. Now what it tries to say that when the supply is provided to a distinct person has been notified, means it is their branch, agent or an authorized person, then in that respect when the transaction is with that distinct person, then the invoice has to be issued within the quarter or on the receipt of the invoice. Then tax invoice should contain the description of service, value of service, tax charge thereon and other particulars as must be provided in the invoice rules. Now the next tranche in respect of goods is the continuous supply of goods. So this is again a novel concept which was missing under the VAT laws. So first of all, let us
In case of services, in case of auditor, normally invoice or amount is calculated in the month of March only to provide for TDS.
Okay.
If they don't provide in the account, no TDS will be deducted in time.
Correct.
In that case, what is to be done? Because audit will be completed in the month of September.
Right.
Then what is to be done?
So which is the date of provision of service? Sir, to the limited knowledge of accounting I have, whenever in the month of March we are doing the provisional entry, we are anticipating that this is the probable expenditure of the audit fees. That's why we are debiting it in the books of account in the month of March. When the actual service is to be taken place in the month of July, August or so on, and the audit would be completed at that point of time. Now say for example, audit fees of the previous financial year is 1 lakh rupees and you made the provision of 1 lakh. And then now you have started doing the audit of the books of account. And while doing the auditing, you have come across you have to employ more labor and you find that now the fees would be 1,25,000. So what you will do? You will charge 1,25,000 or so, or you will say that since my provision in the books of account is only 1 lakh, I will not charge 1,25,000. What you will do, sir? Sir, TDS, Mahendra Bhai is there. He will explain it in a better manner. Sir, sorry, I am done. So TDS it's a separate matter, but for GST.
Even under GST Obviously, there will be problem for
Sir, why problem? There is no problem. Absolutely, because the service is provided in the month of say July, August or September. This is merely a provision which you have made in the books of account that this is my probable expenditure towards audit fees.
matching. He is trying to talk about matching the transaction.
But why matching the transaction? Matching of the transaction will come only when the invoice is issued by other auditor. Whether invoice will be issued by the auditor on 31st March? Of course not. So there is no question of putting it into the GSTR 1 or GSTR 2. These are the merely journal entries for making the provision of the expenses because we are following the accrual system. There is nothing to do that there is a provision of size. This is what my limited knowledge says. I don't have. Now, continuous supply of goods. This is a novel concept. So first of all, let us understand what do you mean by continuous supply of goods. It has been defined under section 2 subsection 32. It says it means the supply of goods which is provided or agreed to be provided on a continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract, whether or not by means of a wire, cable, pipeline or other conduit, and for which the supplier invoices the recipient on a regular or a periodic basis and includes supply of such goods as the government may subject to such condition as may be notified, specified. So first of all, there has to be a continuous supply, should be continuous or on recurrent basis, and either that it would be by means of wire, cable, pipeline or other conduit, and for which the supplier invoices the recipient on a regular or recurrent basis. This is known as a continuous supply of goods. So which kind of continuous supply of goods we can give the example? Mobile is a service transaction, sir. I am talking about goods. Huh? Gas, yes, gas, supply of gas. That is a continuous supply. Anything else? Water, yes, water is a goods. So all this kind of continuous supply will come out. So basic transactions, सुबह वो दूध वाला भैया आता है अपने यहाँ दूध रख के जाता है. That is also continuous supply. That paper वाला comes to our home to drop the paper. That is also continuous supply of goods. Right? Now let us see how it would be invoiced. कैसे करेंगे? Now it says there would be two options. If there is a successive statement of accounts are involved, then before or at the time each such statement is issued. Now successive statement of account means the invoice only. So your दूध वाला भैया gives you the invoices, then at that before or at the time of each such statement is received, then at that point of time his liability will start. But if the successive payment, and another is the successive payment is involved, that means on the payment basis, then the loss is before or at the time each such payment is received. Normally दूध वाला भैया को जब भी हम पेमेंट देते हैं तभी देता है, तभी कुछ देता भी नहीं, बोला हिसाब खत्म, वो चिट्ठी पड़ जाती है. So what is the time of issuance of invoice on the basis of the payment which has been made in respect of supply of water or supply of electricity? What is the time? Because you are getting at regular interval invoice statement of account from that electricity company or a gas company, and you have to discharge the tax liability at that point of time. Then goods which are sent or taken on approval or sale or return or similar terms. जैसे मैंने goods को sale और return basis पे supply किया है. So what is the time limit of supply service? If we see the normal case, then at the time of delivery, before or at the time of delivery. So I have to pay the tax. But if suppose I have sent the goods on return or approval basis, then the time will be changed. What is the time? It says invoice has to be issued at the earliest of the following two events. Number one, before or at the time when it becomes known to the supplier that the supply has taken place, or within 6 months period or from the date of removal, whichever is earlier. ये दो टाइम में से जो भी जल्दी है उस टाइम पे you have to discharge you have to issue the invoice and your liability will start. Then now we have understood continuous supply of goods. अभी देखते हैं what is continuous supply of services. It means a supply of services which is provided or to be provided continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract for a period exceeding 3 months with a periodic payment obligation and includes supply of such services as the central or a state government may whether or not subject to any condition by notification specified. So if the services are more than 3 months on a continuous basis, that service will be considered as a continuous supply of services, or government may notify certain services as a continuous service. So at present, works contract services under the service tax law is a continuous supply of services. So now someone will ask me, okay, audit fees, concurrent audit fees, whether it's a continuous supply of service? Yes. Statutory audit fees, whether it is a continuous supply of service? Yes, because the appointment letter says that you have been appointed to do the statutory audit for the period financial year 17-18. So for the whole year you have to provide the service. It's not only that in the month of July or August you have to do the audit. So it would be a continuous supply of services. Then how you will issue the invoice? Again there when we say 3 situations. First situation where the due date is ascertained. That means in the contract of audit itself, it has been ascertained that when you will issue the invoice, then it says before or on the due date of payment. Then second situation, due date is not ascertainable. Now the payment terms in that, it is not ascertainable which is the due date. Then in that case, before or after the time when the supplier receives the payment, that is, then you have to see when he received the payment. This would be the date. Now audit fees में ऐसा ही रहता है ना, we never quantify कभी मुझे पैसा मिलना, which date. It is always unascertainable, and that is the reason our fees are always unascertainable. Then we cry. So now henceforth we should start practice that whenever we give the appointment letter, appointment letter everything is mentioned. This is the fees, this is the year, but we never mention at what point of time they have to pay. So now we have to pay or mention that also. Payment is linked to completion of an event. Suppose if it has been provided in that once the audit is completed, at that point of time only I will charge. Then in that case, on or before the date of completion of an event. So जब वो complete हो गया, that means audit is completed. So that also we don't put it in our letter. So now we should, at least I am not putting it. I don't know about it, but we should start to that practice. Because the law supports them. One very important thing in respect of an input tax is just little bit out of that. Input tax credit is, now the law provides that when you have availed the input services from your supplier, and if you don't pay to your vendor within a period of 6 months, then you have to reverse the credit. This is a very good So now same example, me and Pranav, I have provide the services to Pranav Bhai. So once I have issued the invoice to Pranav, so immediately Pranav will take the input tax credit. Now if he doesn't pay me for a period of 6 months, then he has to reverse the credit on the 7th month, first day of the 7th month. और उसको जो भी credit दिया, he has to reverse it. So now you have to ask our client, sir, आपकी credit चली जाएगी, please do the input, pay me so that you can take the credit. But nowadays clients are also very smart. Don't worry, पैसा ही कहाँ दिया है कि you are talking about the tax credit. And also the law provides that whenever you make the payment, that means whenever Pranav will make the payment, at that time again he will get the re-credit. So not to worry. So clients को ज़्यादा समझाना भी कभी-कभी मुश्किल हो जाता है. That is again अपने पैर पे कुआड़ी मारो. Then supply of services when it ceases under a contract before the completion of service. Sometimes what will happen that we have entered into a contract, but contract comes to end before the full services has been provided. Then in that respect, what is the time when the invoice has to be issued? It says at the time when the supply ceases, and invoice shall be issued to the extent of supply affected before such cessation. So this is the as far as the cessation of the supply. Then certain special circumstances under which invoice has to be issued. Now the law provides that within 30 days period of time, you have to apply for the registration. Now during that 30 days period of time, naturally you will do the transaction. बराबर है? Now so that whenever you issue the transaction, you have to issue the invoice, because the law provides that before or at the time of the removal of the goods, you have to issue the invoice. So you have issued the invoice. But your certificate of registration comes at a later date of time. So till that point of time, you cannot charge or levy the tax GST. You can levy only when you are registered. So after 35th day, you are registered. So now you have to revise your return, because you have to ultimately charge the tax to the other person. So in that case, those provide that yes, you can revise your invoices after that period of time, and you can even issue it to the same. However, such revision should be within 1 month from the date of issue of invoice. So that is the first special circumstances. Second is the exempted supply. If a person is a taxable person, so if a person is providing exempted goods or exempted services or both, or paying tax under composition levy, then he need not have to issue the tax invoice, but is to issue a bill of invoice. So non-taxable services, exempt service or under composition levy, he has to issue only the bill of invoice and not the tax of invoice. Further, in the issue of bill of supply instead of tax invoice, and no bill of supply for supply less than ₹200, 200 रुपये के नीचे इनवॉइस है तो उसे बिल ऑफ सप्लाई भी करने की जरूरत नहीं है. Then, if you receive the advance payment, I have told you that when you are receiving the advance payment, you have to issue a receipt voucher or any other document which will say that yes, this I have received the advance money. If no supply is made subsequently and no tax invoice is issued, then registered taxable person have to issue a refund voucher. Now, suppose if you have received the money in advance, but at a later date you are not in a position to supply the goods or supply the services, but then you have to refund the money, then in that case you have to prepare a refund voucher. Then supply from an unregistered person. Registered taxable person has to pay the tax under reverse charge mechanism, then he has to issue an invoice on the date in respect of goods or services which is received by him. Whenever he receives the goods or services, at that point of time he has to issue the invoice when he is discharging the tax liability under reverse charge mechanism. These are the content of invoice. I am not going into the depth of it because it's self-explanatory. This is the GST bill format, how the bill should look like. So you have to mention GSTIN, name, address, serial number of invoice, date of invoice, then details of receiver, bill to, and this is ship to. So ship bill to Pranav Kapadia, ship to Vikramba. So that will come over here. Then serial number, description of good, HSN code, quantity, unit, date, total, discount. If the discount is predetermined, then I have to mention the discount over here. CGST, SGST or IGST is applicable. So this is the whole draft of the invoice. Further, it provides that whenever you prepare an invoice, that invoice has to be, detail has to be uploaded on the GSTN website. Now why that is, it is there? This is there in respect of an new for draft rules or e-way bills are there. So now what e-way bills provide, that whenever the goods are moving, at that point of time you will issue the invoice. So one copy has to be uploaded on the GSTN website by the supplier. Along with that, that invoice and the e-way bill, that has to be given to the transporter, and transporter will carry the goods along with that invoice, and transporter also needs to upload that e-way invoice on the GSTN portal. And third is the actual receiver of the goods, even he has to issue the e-way bill on the GSTN portal. So what will happen when the goods are moving from say Bombay to Gujarat, and in the road while transporting, authority have detained the truck, and they wanted to know whether the tax has been paid on these goods or not. So at that point of time they will ask for the invoice as well as the copy of e-way bill, and then he will verify whether the goods are made for this person and it is matches with the transaction. If it matches, then your truck will be released and it will go. But if anything is not matching, then there would be a problem. So and then there would be a confiscation of goods or detention of the lorry also. Now, how many copies has to be issued? It says when the copies of tax, when there is a supply of goods, 3 copies needs to be prepared. Original copy for the recipient, duplicate copy for the transporter, and triplicate copy for the supplier. In respect of service transaction, only 2 copies of invoice has to be prepared. Original is for the recipient and the second copy is for the supplier. So 3 copy for goods, 3 for the service. Again, goods or services के लिए अलग लो. Then do's and don'ts. Issue बनाने के बाद क्या करना है क्या नहीं करना. When supply is made for a consideration, registered taxable person shall prominently indicate in all the documents relating to assessment, tax invoice and other like documents the amount of tax which will form part of the price. So he has to mention the amount of tax separately on the fees of the invoice. He cannot say this is my term tax invoice. Number 2, serial number of the invoice issued during the tax period shall be furnished electronically through common portal in form GSTR1. This has to be there in GSTR1. The third, registered taxable person have to obtain the invoice reference number from the GST and on the basis of invoice issued by him and produce for verification to the proper officer. This I was talking about the e-way transaction, that when the invoice has been uploaded on the GST and network, that will be matched by the proper officer. If it is matched, then there is no problem, otherwise there is a problem. Person who is not registered under the GST shall not issue to collect any tax in respect of any supply of goods and or services by of a tax, so he should not collect separately tax if he is unregistered. And invoice then consolidated invoice. When the consolidated invoice has to be issued, it says when a registered taxable person may not issue the tax invoice, that means the consolidated, he has to issue a consolidated invoice if the value of goods or services is less than 200 rupees, if the recipient is not a registered person and the recipient does not require such invoices, then in such case taxpayer shall issue a consolidated tax invoice for such supply at the close of the each day in respect of all such supplies. तो ये कहाँ applicable होगा? हाँ? Hotel? Retail, yes. Retail means this is the content of bill of supply is there. Now tax invoice in special cases. Now what will happen in respect of a special case? Input service distributor. Input service distributor has to issue tax invoice containing the following details. So apart from normal details, he has to also include the name, address and GST and number of the input service distributor. A consecutive serial number containing only alphabets or numeral unique for a financial year, date of its invoice, name and address of the GST and of the supplier of service, the credit in respect of which is being distributed, and the serial number and date of invoice issued by such supplier. Then name and address of the recipient to whom the credit is distributed. So as I have told you that input service distributor is work like a postman. जिसके पास से इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट आया उसकी डिटेल डालनी है और जिसको डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर रहे हैं क्रेडिट दैट डिटेल हैज टू बी मेंशन्ड ओवर हियर. Now if the supplier of a service is a banking company, so banking company को one relaxation has been provided. What relaxation has been provided? That the invoices should not be a serially numbered and the address of the recipient of services may not be included in the tax invoice. I fail to understand that in the respect of this whole computerization era, why they have such relaxation has been there. I can understand in a good old days, this again provision is from the service tax law. In good old days when everything is manually, at that time I can understand this, that the relaxation to the banking industry can be provided. But why now in the respect of to this provided to the banking companies and everything is computerization? Not able to understand. Then supplier of taxable service, if he is a goods transport agent, transporter of goods, who is supplying the service, then apart from the normal invoice, he has to also provide this, the following documents, details. Number one, gross weight of the consignment, name of the consignor and consignee, registration number of goods carriage in which the goods are transported, details of goods transported, details of place of origin and destination, GST and number of the person liable for paying tax, whether as a consignor, consignee or goods transport agency. Now this says over here that in the GST era also the goods transport operator would be under reverse charge mechanism. Nowhere under the law it has been specifically provided. But if we read this, then it appears that under the GST era transporters would be under reverse charge, they need not have to be registered. But as I have told you, GST law is so huge and it comes in piecemeal way. So it becomes very difficult to identify what kind of provisions are there. Initially, in the month of June 2016, one model law has come. Along with it, proposed rules were come. Along with it, some four processes were introduced. And in that process, all details were there. Then in the month of November 2016, again model law were there. And draft rules were there. They were also totally different. And now in the month of January, final rule has in the month of April, final rule has come. So now what has happened to those draft rules, we don't know the sensitivity of the same, whether still they are valid or not valid. But that only the time will tell that what will happen. Then tax invoice in respect of a person who is providing the services of supplying passenger transport and services. Then tax invoice shall include a ticket in any form by whatever name code, and apart from that, relaxation has been provided in respect of the address of the recipient of service. Now why the relaxation has been provided? Because they have nothing to do with the address. Because all the address is a non-registered person only, and they are not going to take the credit. That would be the probable reason of relaxation which has been provided. However, all other particulars have to be provided in the invoice. Now, transportation of goods without invoice. Now, as I have told you that there may be a situation that under a normal situation when goods are transported, it has to be accompanied with an invoice and e-way bill receipt. But in respect of certain transactions, the transportation of the goods will take place along without any invoice. Then how it will take place? It said transportation of goods without issuance of invoice for the purpose of supply of liquid gas where the quantity at the time of removal from the place of business of the supplier is not known, or transportation of goods for job work, or transportation of goods for reasons other than by way of a supply, or such other supplies as may be notified by the board. Then under this 5-4 situation, the transportation of the goods can be done without any invoice, otherwise not. So HR situation ke alawa everywhere transportation has to be with invoice. Now if the invoice is not there, then what has to be there along with the transportation? So what it says, that the consignor may issue a delivery challan in lieu of invoice at the time of removal of the goods for transportation containing the following dates. So instead of tax invoice, it would be a delivery challan. So the existing concept of delivery challan still will be there. Now what should include in the delivery challan? It should be a serial number, date and number of the delivery challan, name, address and GSTN of the consignor if he is registered, HSN code and description of the code. Here also they are saying in challan also you give the HSN code. Quantity, provisional, where the exact quantity being supplied is not known. Taxable value, tax rate and the tax amount where the transportation is for supply to the consignee. Place of supply in case of an interstate movement, and last one is the signature. So this details has to be there on the challan. This is nothing but the invoice only, because every details is talk about the invoice. The delivery challan should be prepared in triplicate. This delivery challan has to be prepared in triplicate. One is for the original is for the consignee, duplicate for the transporter, and triplicate for the consignee. And further, these challan have to be declared in the form that is e-way bill. So this challan would have to be declared in the e-way bill. If it is not declared, then probably your goods would be seized, and the vehicle would be ticketed. So one has to be very much careful. Now under these 4 circumstances, the transportation has to be made without the invoice. Now can anyone visualize what kind of things would come over here? Transportation of goods for reasons other than by way of a supply. On approval, free sample years, or when the transportation of goods has to be taken place to the depot. Can you say? No, the depot will not cover it. It is goods return, yes. But under this situation, they would come over here. So on the basis of challan, it should go.
Shifting of residence.
Shifting of residence, but that is goods. First of all, but that should fall within the definition of goods. It shall not be.
If my depot is in the same state.
If the depot is in the same state, then also it is yes. But if the depot is in other state, then no. Then tax invoice has to be, because GST needs to be charged. Then further, transportation of goods without invoice, where the goods are being transported in a semi-knocked down or a completely knocked down condition, then also you can send without tax invoice. Under which situation? Let's see. The supplier shall issue the complete invoice before the dispatch of the first consignment. Knocked down condition mein to pehle to pura bill issue karo. Then the supplier shall issue a delivery challan for each of the subsequent consignment, giving reference of the invoice. तो जब भी knockdown condition में जाती है vehicle, तभी he has to issue a challan, and in that challan he has to give the reference to the invoice. This is called matching concept, or a tagging of the transaction. Each consignment shall be accompanied by copies of the corresponding delivery challan along with a duly certified copy of the invoice. And last, the original copy of the invoice shall send along with the last consignment. Last consignment is original receipt. Now many a times in respect of cranes, what will happen if I wanted to transport the crane from one place to another place? Now naturally that crane cannot go into at one lot. So it has to be completely in the knocked out condition, and in 10 trucks that crane will go. So at that point of time, what is to be prepared? So it has to be prepared a challan and it has to be sent to them. But now the important point over here is that it will not attract over here, because it says when the goods are saying on a semi-knocked down or completely knocked down condition. Here my crane is going there for the purpose of carrying out some activity. It is on a lease transaction. So what will happen? That has no coverage over here. So this is again a grey area what is to be done over here. Now last is the debit note or credit note. As I have told you that whenever there is any upward revision or a downward revision of price, one have to issue debit note or credit note and complete the transaction. So under the following situation, debit note can be issued when the tax invoice has been issued for supplies and either taxable value or tax charge in that tax invoice is found to be a lesser than tax value or tax charge for such supply, then registered taxable person has to issue the such supply shall issue a debit note to the recipient. So जब मेरी value कम हो गई तो I have to issue a debit note. When my value has been increased, then I have to issue a credit note to that person. But one more important condition, this is as regards the debit note is there. Now when the credit note has to be issued, it can be issued in 3 circumstances. One, where the tax invoice has been issued for supplies, either that supplies are taxable value, tax charge in the tax invoice is found to be exceeds the supply made to the recipient. Number 2, goods supplied are returned by the recipient, or services supplied are found to be deficient. In these 3 circumstances, one is to issue the credit note to the recipient. Registered taxable person who has supplied such supplies may issue to the recipient a credit note. No credit note is to be issued if the incidence of tax has been passed to the other person. If the other person has already taken the credit, that incidence has been passed, then he cannot issue the credit note. Now when this credit note has to be recorded in the books of account, it says that debit note or credit note in relation to the supply, he shall have to declare the details of such credit note or debit note in the return for the month during which such credit note or debit note has been issued or received, or any subsequent month before the 30th September following the end of the financial year, or the date of filing of the annual return, that is 31st December, whichever is earlier, and he has to adjust that thing. So in these 3 circumstances, debit note and credit note has to be recorded in the transaction. Now let's come to the accounts and records which has to be maintained by the SSC. So every registered taxable, yes. Yes, that has to be there, limit of 6 months. Every registered taxable person shall keep and maintain at his principal place of business, as mentioned in the certificate of registration, true and correct account of production or manufacture of goods, inward or outward supply of goods or service, stock of goods, input tax credit await, output tax payable and paid, invoice, bill, supply, delivery, challan, receipt, payment and refund voucher and e-way bills. So this much documents has to be maintained by the every taxpayer. Now they have given an option that you can maintain these accounts in an electronic form, and it has to be authenticated by way of a digital signature. So आप electronic form में भी रख सकते हैं. Further, these accounts and records have to be maintained for manufacturing, trading and service activities separately. So if you are a manufacturer, trader or a supplier service, for each activity you have to maintain this list of accounts or document. All these things. This is not something new. This is also applicable in VAT laws and service tax also. This is just documented, so don't worry about it. As such, if you don't maintain this, then you cannot able to work upon that. So everything is there. Then every registered taxable shall maintain the accounts and details in respect of. So in respect of stock, he has to maintain this. In respect of payment of tax, he has to maintain this document. In respect of other particulars, he has to maintain this document. Let's see one by one. So in respect of stock, what he has to maintain? Account books of stock of each commodity received and supplied by him. So agar wo 10, if he is into the business of chemical and dyes, and if he is dealing in 50 items, then all that he has to maintain the details of all 50 items. Okay? Now what he has to maintain? Account shall contain the particulars of opening balance, receipt and supply, goods stolen, lost, stolen or destroyed, goods written off, goods destroyed by way of a gift, goods destroyed by way of a free sample, balance of stock including any raw material, finished goods, scrap and wastage thereof. So naturally, when you are having your system of account taking place of your stock register, then all this detail has to be there in their system. So you need not have to bother. Then he has to maintain the accounts and details in respect of payment of tax. What details he has to mention? He has to say how much is the tax payable under reverse charge mechanism, tax collected and paid, input tax credit claim, and register of tax invoice, credit note, debit note, delivery challenge issued or received during the any tax period. So naturally, debit note, credit note register has to be there because ultimately I have to upload it in GSTR 1 and 2. Then particulars, name and complete address of the supplier from whom he has received the goods or services. Naturally, his in the master, all these details will be there. Name and complete address of the person to whom he has supplied the goods or services. Complete address of the premises where the goods are stored by him, including the goods stored during transit, along with the particulars of the stock stored therein. That means it then talks about the warehouse, wherein he is keeping his stock, and in respect of the transit of the goods, in which place he has stored the goods, that detail he has to know. Then he has to maintain the records in respect of storage of goods, storage of books of account, and entries in register, accounts and documents. Usme kya है, what he has to carry. In respect of storage of goods, if any taxable goods are found to be stored at any place other than the declared place, then without the cover of any valid document, proper officers shall determine the tax payable on such goods as if such goods have been supplied by registered person. That means if it is any place registered, if any goods are lying at any place, which is not his registered place of business which has been declared, and which is without any invoice backed by any document, then the officer will say that on these goods you have to pay the tax because this is an account. Then where you have to keep your books of account, storage of books of account. Registered taxable person shall keep the books of account at a principal place of business and at every related places of business mentioned in his certificate of registration. This will also include any electronic form of data stored on any electronic devices. That means computer का अगर data है तो that he should be in a position to. कोई बोलेगा मेरा accounting cloud में हो रहा है, what is to be done? So that place needs to be. Can we say that that place is my principal place of business? Huh? You have to?
I have the access from principal place.
But that access is from any place. So can I say that I have kept my books of account in my principal place of business? That is the question.
What is required is to be kept in the principal place of business. If it is available in multiple places, there is no bar.
There is no bar. And so I meant to say that whether can we say that it is kept in the principal place of business? That is the point. Access is fine. Okay. Entries in register, accounts and documents. It shall not be, this is very long. Entries in register, accounts and documents shall not be erased or effaced or overwritten. Incorrect entries shall be scored out under attention and their correct entry shall be recorded. Third, in cases of maintenance is electronically, a log of every entry edited or deleted shall be maintained. So, whenever, now on the one hand, we are saying that we are maintaining because the data is so huge, we have to compulsorily go in an electronic form of maintenance of books of account. So, the question of any erasure, offense or overwritten will not be there. Second thing, incorrect entry should be scored out under the attention and then correct attention entry. So, that means that entry has to be under some authorized person, so that authentication has to be taken. Then in respect of maintenance of electronically, a log of every entry edited or related shall be maintained. So if you are using a SAP system, then naturally that log is always maintained. Isn't it? In the SAP system, that log is always maintained, whoever is edited, because that right is given to every person. And whenever any entry has been edited, so at that point of time, that person's name has to be altered over there. And more so ever, if we see the principle of bookkeeping, as far as I know, that you cannot edit it, you have to always, whenever you want to change any entry, you have to always reverse that entry. So there is no question of any addition or deletion. But since we are having the practice that any time all D करके element delete मार दिया, that kind of practice I think will not be good in the GST. Now, not only the principal has to maintain, even agent have to maintain certain books of account. What agent has to do? Particulars of authorization received by him from each principal to receive or supply goods or services on behalf of such principal separately. Now, authorization requirement, there has to be first of an agreement has to be there between principal and principal and an agent. Then you will receive the goods and I will supply the goods on my behalf. Particulars including description, value, quantity of goods or services received on behalf of every principal. Particulars including description, value and quantity of goods or services supplied on behalf of every principal. Details of account furnished to every principal and tax paid on receipt or on supply of goods or services affected on behalf of every principal. So agent has to take care of so many things in order to prove that yes, that this goods has been come to my so many principals and I am distributing or sending it to the other person. So these are the maintenance of accounts by the agents. Then every registered person shall maintain records and details in respect of manufacturing of goods, supplying of services and executing works contract. Goods wise he has to maintain the account. In respect of manufacturing, monthly production account showing the quantitative details of raw materials or services used in the manufacturing and quantitative details of goods or manufacture including the waste and byproducts thereof. So manufacturing के लिए ऐसा है. In respect of supplying of services, showing the quantitative details of goods used in the provision of each service and details of input services utilized therein and the services supplied. The तीन चीज़ रखनी है. Now, most important is the execution of the works contract. It says name and address of the person on whose behalf the works contract is entered, that is fine. Description, value and quantity of goods or services received and utilized for in the execution of each works contract. So now each contract has to be prepared in a proper manner that in where the goods are going in my works contract. Technically and practically all the works contractor knows that what is my position, but the only problem is that it is not properly documented and there comes in the books of account. So now I think they have to maintain it in a proper manner so that each site-wise detail would be there with the person. Details of payment received in respect of each works contract. So works contractor, they have to maintain the details in this manner. Now these accounts and records have to be then every owner, operator of the warehouse or godowns or any other place used for storage of goods and every transporter, irrespective of whether he is registered taxable or not, shall maintain the records of the consignor, consignee and other relevant details of the goods as may be prescribed. So now the duty is casted on the warehouse keeper or a godown keeper on a transporter that whatever goods he is taking, he has to have the details of consignor, consignee and the other relevant details of the goods as may be prescribed. So that he also has to maintain that. And commissioner may notify a class of taxable person to maintain the additional accounts of documents for such purpose as may be prescribed. Then, if a turnover during a financial year exceeds 1 crore rupees, shall get his accounts audited. This we have already discussed. So I am going. Time, एक slide. How we need period of holding the books of account. The law provides that you have to maintain the books of accounts or other records shall retain until the expiry of 72 months. That means 6 साल तक you have to preserve the books of accounts and documents and all returns with them. 6 साल तक रखना है. And if the registered taxable person who is a party to an appeal or a revision or any other proceeding before an appellate authority and the order has been received, then in 1 year period of time he has to maintain the accounts with him. So friends, this is what all about the whole procedural aspect. More is on the maintenance of books of accounts and records that has to be kept. And I am very much lastly thankful to all of you for the patience hearing, and of course to the chamber for providing me an opportunity to express my views before all of you. Lastly, this is my last slide. Every time I put this slide on the GST thing. Happy learning for the GST. This is a girl and boy playing dandiya. Boy is having a dandiya of goods and girl is having a dandiya of services. Let's hope that in the month of July we will see these dandiyaras, though the Navratri is not there. And let's hope that instead of just September, we will see that in July and playing the dandiya. Friends, thank you very much for all.
Friends, I'm sure you all would agree that before this session, we have learned about all the complexities of GST. But as learners speak about today's session,